All right, we're back again with another Monday with Matt, and we are going to cover today the case study that Matt wrote about finding a chief revenue officer. So I wanted to kick off, Matt, with a description of what this chief revenue officer role is. It's called the CRO role, and why it's important for growing companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because every company is going to have a little bit of a different play on a CRO. And when we talk about it in general, it's really somebody that's taking care of that top line money that's coming in, and it's new money that's coming into the company, and really putting a definition and a strategy around who is your customer, why are they your target customer, and then really looking at the entire customer journey from the very first time they hear about your company to when they start doing business with you and how you're fulfilling it. And so there's a lot of steps, and you'll often hear a lot of conversations about the funnel. Top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, and where that chief revenue officer's responsibilities is owning that funnel and figuring out how to get new customers to the top of the funnel and then move them down to the bottom of the funnel where they become paying customers, from a prospect to a lead to a hot lead to engaged with conversation to, okay, we're going to sign a contract. And so that CRO is really the one that is responsible for that entire customer journey and understanding that. Typically, especially with small and emerging companies, that's often the CEO. The face of the company is the one that does that pipelining. But as companies mature and they get more sophisticated, they have to become a lot more in tune with who their customer is, and equally as important, who isn't their customer. Why waste time with a customer that isn't really someone that you're going to be a good partner with and you're going to make money on? So the CRO's got to really define, and work with both who is and who isn't your customer, and then evolve that through the culture of the organization. So it's a big job, no doubt, and it's definitely a difficult one to hire for, especially if it's your first chief revenue officer.
It's a huge job. And as you say, especially if it's the first time you've had that role in your organization. So tell us, Matt, about this particular client in the case study you wrote, what they were looking for and what their particular challenge was.
Yeah, so this customer was a digital strategy firm. They had about 5 offices, mostly in North America, but they did some of the offshore stuff with their development and execution. But they're a company that had grown basically through referral partners. And as the climate that they live in became more cluttered, they realized that the referrals weren't coming as quite as often. And they still did great work. They still do great work. But what they were finding is when they first started 15 years ago, the competition set was very, very small with other digital strategy firms. Every year, they see more and more digital strategy firms coming into the market, therefore becoming more difficult to fight for business. And so the CEO realized that they needed to strategically change the way they thought about their business if they were going to continue to grow at a 15-20% pace like they had for the last 10 years. And they realized that it had to become much more sophisticated and much more outward facing, because the referrals weren't coming in, and it was, they'd go to pitches and they wouldn't be one of 2, they'd be one of 4 different firms that their potential client was considering. So they really, collectively, I give them a lot of credit, because this is a tough decision to make as a leadership team, is they said, we've got to become outward facing. We've got to become more of a sales culture. And that meant everything from becoming more sophisticated with their outward marketing to everybody on the leadership team thinking about how do we win new business. Whereas before it was always delivering on business, which has got to stay there. But they really understood that they weren't good at talking about themselves, and they weren't good about promoting themselves, and they weren't good at going after new business. So they, as a group, realized that they had to fundamentally change that. And there was no one within the organization that had that skill set. So they had to add, at a very senior level, reporting directly into the CEO, someone who could help with all of those things that I just mentioned, and even more importantly, help with the change of the culture of the organization, to think about, okay, how do we talk about ourselves? How do we promote ourselves? And how do we find new business outside of the referral programs?
So that's really interesting. So the client already decided what their challenge was. When you stepped in, How did you start to address this search and helping them meet this hiring challenge?
Yeah, so we started by interviewing the leadership team. We did it in two different ways. We started with the CEO and their founding partner, who was who was involved with it. So we started at the very top, but then we brought the entire team together without the CEO to hear what they were saying, and then we brought everybody together. And what we were looking for is consistencies with what everybody needed. And then if there were places where there may have been inconsistencies, bringing the group together to talk about their definitions of what those inconsistencies were, and then making decisions about what direction we should go. I'll give an example. There was one particular executive who really felt that they should do more of ABM, account-based marketing. And in the world of recruiting, when you talk about account-based marketing for a chief revenue officer, what you're really looking at there is targeting a handful of accounts that can produce significant, like grand slam type of accounts when it comes to revenue. However you define that in your organization, that's what account-based marketing is. So it's a small, much smaller group of potential customers that are going to produce a much higher yield. Typically, the sales cycle on that is significantly longer. And so we had one executive that wanted to really focus in on the ABM strategy. But as we started to interview and talk to them, this customer was awesome at hitting doubles. You know, when it came to a revenue number, they were great at it. They knew exactly what they could make off of it. They know how to service it. They were awesome at it. But when they landed that grand slam account, which was typically within their world would be probably, 100 to 200% more revenue than a double, they didn't know how to price it and they didn't know how to deliver. And after they would do a postmortem on a project, they'd realize that they actually lost money. And so as we started to talk about defining who is your customer, and what is a perfect customer and what's not a perfect customer, not because they're bad or don't do good work, it's just that's not how you make your money and where you're good at it. We realized that this company was awesome at those doubles. And so in that case, what we did is we got the entire team, as we talked through this, we got a consensus is that we're not looking for a CRO who's great at account-based marketing. What we're looking for is a CRO who is great at the cultural piece we talked about, but even more importantly, creating that funnel system that is about a bunch of doubles instead of just a couple of grand slams.
Wow, amazing. So it really aligned the group in saying like what's going to be pure new business versus organic growth and developing, what size of business was going to be important for them in the long run that they could service, but also like both the skills that are hard skills of numbers and sales and the soft skills of chemistry and culture. That's a lot to ask in one role.
It really is. Yeah. It was fun as we went through that. There were many times during that process. It was time consuming. They put a lot of time into it, but there were times when, I was looking at my partner and we were looking around the room and everyone's like, does this person even exist? And we're like, well, we're not quite there. We're going to funnel this. We're going to fine tune this. They're out there. We just got to make sure that we're being realistic about it. And so through those iterations and conversations about who's the perfect profile, we were able to come up with something that led us to a search strategy that was really very reasonable. As we started to really, chip away at the edges and form what it was that they were looking for.
So now that we've kind of moved into that, what was your next step? How did MICA tackle this search? What type of industries were you looking for? Was it the same industry, different? We'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we realized, because we've worked in this digital strategy space with so many other customers, our recommendation was that we really do need to find somebody that comes out of digital consultancy. This can't, because there are so many nuances to that. And one of the other things that we talked about, I think last week or the week before, was digital transformation. Mm-hmm. This is somebody who understands what the definition of digital transformation is, and they have to be very fluent in that language and understand how that works. So we knew that we had to target people who were in digital consultancies. And so it was a national search. We basically looked in every major market in North America when we did our geo-targeting and our candidate mapping. And that was really those were the two things that started it. And one of the other criteria we're looking at is somebody who'd been there before. Because this was their first CRO, we needed someone who understood how to build this. right? It wasn't somebody that was coming in and be like, okay, I'm going to just sort of tweak some knobs here and there, and I'll be able to improve it by 5%. I mean, this was a complete build for them when it comes to a sales process. So we also knew that we had to have somebody that had been part of a build process, not somebody that was just plucked in and put into, a big digital consultancy firm that already had the machine working. We needed somebody that really knew how to put the pieces in place and evaluate the different pieces before they went in place. So there was that layer was, we felt, really an absolute must for that skill set. And that narrowed the candidate pool significantly.
So who did you ultimately find? What were their results? Who did you ultimately put in front of the client as right for them?
Yeah, so we did exactly that. Our candidate mapping brought us to 5 different candidates within about 4 weeks, where they started the interview process, and they came directly out of some of their competitors. So we also had to talk about some non-competes and make sure that we were dealing with any of those types of issues that might be on the table and part of the process. We didn't want to get to the end and have the client say, yeah, we want to hire you, and then realize, oh, well, you've got a 2-year non-compete that's ironclad. So we had to make sure we dug under the hood for those types of things as well. But ultimately, we delivered on exactly what we set out with regards to the profile that we put together, and the mapping and the outreach that we did delivered exactly that. It was people who had been part of a build in a digital strategy firm and were hunters, and they understood the funnel process and the definition process of accounts, knew how to hit doubles like crazy, and were really the cultural piece. So much of that comes down to the meetings with the leadership team, right? I mean, we do a really good job of understanding, the egos that go along with it, and that's not a bad word in our industry. Ego, right. Everybody's got ego. It's just a matter of how do you fit them together. So we really, I know based on the amount of time we spent with that leadership team and defining the role, it really put us in a place to evaluate candidates and what would be a culture and chemistry fit as well. So that's what we were able to deliver. And the candidate actually started, I think it was right when everybody went into lockdown. Talked to the CEO about 4 weeks ago, and the CEO was just like, we brought the exact right person in, exact right time. We threw them, for lack of a better term, a shit show with trying to build a function that didn't exist during the pandemic, and culturally and skill set wise, it was just an absolute home run. They've actually been able to build the system, build a new business system, create that funnel, make the definitions, and they're actually winning new business based on the efforts of that person and the team that they're managing there now.
Amazing story, and what a great success to really help not just find a person for that role, but to really help transform an organization, which it sounds like you, Matt, and Mike have been able to do for a lot of different clients.
Yeah, it was a great project. It was really fun, and what an awesome leadership team they had there. It was they were really bought into the process from start to finish, and respectfully disagreeing and agreeing and getting to the place where they gave us the direction to really just knock it out of the park, to use another baseball term.
Well, thanks for taking the time again to take us through one of your great case studies. Wherever the audience is watching this today, we'll post a link to the written case study. And of course, we always welcome questions from anyone seeing this that wants to know more about MICA, Matt, and the MICA services.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. Have a great day.
You too.